Okay, so today we are talking about one of my favorite villains, who is also one of my least favorite villains in The Wheel of Time. And while I am ambivalent about his storyline, his origin story is one of the best in the series, and that's Padan Fain, who honestly starts out a little bit like a boring background NPC. He's just some guy, a peddler, but then we start to get more details and get to see the whole story unravel. He was a man who ended up twisted, broken, and turned into something entirely weird. Before we get into it, please remember to like and subscribe. So let's start off with part one, Padan Fain, the man we first meet. In chapter 3 of The Eye of the World, he is introduced as a pretty jovial, good natured guy. He's a traveling merchant known as a peddler, and he arrives on Beltane to sell and trade his wares. But what we don't learn until later is that not only is he a dark friend, but he's a very high ranking, special type of dark friend that has been personally chosen by the Dark One to hunt down Rand, Mat, and Perrin. But to become a hunter for the Dark One, he has to go through a process where the shadow breaks his mind and tortures him over and over to make him better at tracking them. But with each change, he loses pieces of himself. Essentially, he is distilled into something less of a human and possibly something not really human at all. But we never get a concrete explanation of what exactly takes place. And this process happens to him multiple times. Later in chapter 47, we learn about the first event. 3 years before Rand's introduction into the story is where Padan Fain's real origins begin. A Murdral finds Fain in a town in Murandy. He's taken to Shale Ghul, an area of the map that offers the biggest focal point of the Dark One's power, and here Fain meets Baalzaman, aka Ishamael. Then Fain is tortured and sent to hunt for the Dragon Reborn. He starts his search around Berlon and the Two Rivers. And after an unsuccessful scouting in that area, Fain is dragged back to Shale Ghul where his mind is broken down and rebuilt by the Dark One once again. Everything he learned about the Dragon Reborn is forced back into him, sharper and more focused. He's then sent out again, more obsessed than before. At this point, he's sure it's one of the three boys, Rand, Mat, or Perrin. Then Baalzaman comes back to Fain in a dream, and Fain grovels and performs another dark ritual that ties him even closer to the shadow. And do you see where we're going here? The process keeps getting more and more extreme. He's promised power and rule over nations. When he returns to Emond's Field, he's told to mark the three boys while a Murdral and a band of Trollocs will be waiting to help him. But Padan Fain fails to collect the boys due to a one, Moraine Domadrid, and Rand, Mat, and Perrin flee, escaping the carnage. Then we move to part two, Shadar Logoth, where everything gets weird. Now, Shadar Logoth is one of the darkest places in the series, and there's a very different, special type of evil there that doesn't even serve the Dark One. It's its own thing, born from paranoia and betrayal. While Fain follows Moraine's party, he tracks them to the ruined city, and this is where everything changes. Padan Fain has an accidental encounter with Mordath, an evil spirit that lives there. And instead of being consumed like everyone else does when they meet Mordath, something different happens. They merge, but not fully and not very cleanly either. The best way to interpret it is that Mordath can't possess someone who has already been corrupted. So they kind of twist around each other. Fain becomes a new thing, not man, not spirit, not even a servant of the dark anymore. So now, on top of the fact that he has been broken down and distilled by the Dark One over and over again until he's not even really a human with a full soul afterwards, now he has basically had an unsuccessful parasitic takeover by a hostile eldritch terror. At this point, Fain is like three entities combined: his old self, a corrupted soul, and Mordeth, who we will explain shortly. Now, one of my favorite side quests of Padan Fain happens after this event, and he scuttles off to the ways because there he has an encounter with something even weirder than Mordeth. He runs into Machin Shin, which is a soul devouring black cloud that hurls threats and insults. And this thing catches Fain, takes a little nibble on him, and is like, "This is gross," and spits him back out and runs away. That's how corrupted Fain is. Something that eats souls and leaves people just a husk was like, ew, no thank you. Now, to get back to the origin story and this Mordeth character, we need to go back in time, way back during the time of the Trolloc Wars, because to understand Fain's new final form, we need to understand what he merges with in Shadar Logoth, the entity known as Mordeth. And that brings us to part 3, the fall of Eredhall. Now, to set ourselves up for this segment of the story, we have to understand the landscape of the world during the Trolloc Wars. 1,000 years after the breaking of the world, there was a period of about 350 years where the nations of the Wheel of Time were decimated by one massive Trolloc attack after another. It started as raids by Shadowspawn and evolved into these massive pitched battles with armies of Trollocs, Fades, and even Dreadlords, channelers that fought for the side of the shadow. And unfortunately, these massive pitched battles typically resulted in a loss for the side of the light unless Aes Sedai were present. So, the king of Eredhall, a man named Balwin Mael or Balwin Ironhand, decided enough was enough and pledged to find a way to beat back the shadow. And this is where we first meet Mordeth. King Balwin takes in this man who is a stranger into his court, and this stranger has a very interesting proposal. He thinks the best way to overthrow the side of the shadow is to become colder and more ruthless than the shadow itself. And Mordeth eventually wins the ear of the king, who makes him his most trusted advisor, and the nation of Eredhall adopts a new battle cry: the victory of the light is all. And slowly but surely, the entire nation of Eredhall descends into paranoia and fanaticism. Eventually, their suspicion and hate created something so unspeakably evil that it began to feed on every living thing within the nation. Once a proud ally of the light, they began using the Shadow's own methods in its war, and it's a choice that destroys the entire nation. Fear and hatred spread. Neighbors turned on each other. The entire nation rotted from the inside out, and no one survived because the entity known as Mordeth. Eredhall dies, and what now stands in its place is called Shadar Logoth, basically a ghost city haunted by what happens when you lose sight of the line between the light and the shadow. Mordeth didn't serve the shadow, but in trying to outmatch it, he became something worse. We never learn exactly what Mordeth's tactics were or exactly how he learned to do what he did, but there are a few details that have led to theories. We do know that Mordeth was a traveler and a bit of an explorer in search of power. We know from interview questions with Brandon Sanderson that he had contact with the Finn, but it's unclear whether he met the Eelfinn, the foxy gift givers, or the Aelfinn, the snaky question answerers, or if Mordeth met both. But it doesn't end at the Finn because Sanderson is also stated saying, "He found many things of darkness." And to paraphrase, Sanderson goes on to say that these powers were outside the one power and the true power, but something more like the Wolf Brother abilities, something older than Saidin and Saidar. Mordeth wasn't an evil man. He was just, quote, I love this quote, by the way, from Brandon Sanderson, looking into things he shouldn't have. So, from Sanderson's statements, we get a pretty cool look at what other mystical evil is possible within the Wheel of Time, even if we don't really see it pop up on page. But all we know for sure is that now the site of the nation sits abandoned and it's now called Shadar Logoth. And it's even so corrupted that Shadow Spawn will not enter. There are two entities left to haunt it: Mordath, who we just talked about, and Mashadar, the silver mist that feeds on and kills anything it touches. A short tangent here, but there was a long standing theory that Mashadar was actually the embodiment of all of the souls that disappeared in Hall. But during a book signing for A Crown of Swords, Robert Jordan stated that Mashadar shows up after everyone in Shadar Logoth, Hall, was dead. And now we can move on to part 4, what Padan Fain becomes. After Fain tracks Moraine's party to Shadar Logoth and has that encounter with Mordath, Fain becomes the biggest wild card of the series. And when he is infected with Mordath, this is a blessing and a curse for Mordath, because Mordath finally found a ride out of his creepy, crusty city, and unfortunately for him, that ride was Padan Fain. It's like a hitchhiker getting picked up by a serial killer. But Fain's soul was already corrupted by the Dark One. Mordath couldn't fully take control of him. He could only merge with him, and after that, Fain is no longer Fain, and Mordath is no longer Mordath. This changes everything for Fain, because now he doesn't need to take orders from the Shadow anymore. He has his own goals, his own hatred. He can't be tracked by the Shadow's forces. He also carries the Shadar Logoth dagger that spreads death and decay, and he scares Rand in a way no Forsaken ever does, because Padan Fain is so utterly unpredictable. He's not trying to win the last battle. He just wants to destroy everything and everyone. He is corruption given form. He's rot walking on two legs. And he just gets stronger once he gets back the Shadar Logoth dagger. So, let's move into part 5, why Padan Fain matters. One of the most interesting aspects of Padan Fain is that after his brush with Mordath, he kind of starts to break all the rules, because in a story where one of the biggest themes is balance, like light versus shadow, Saidin versus Saidar, the pattern versus chaos, Fain is a totally different variable in the equation. He's not fate, he's not prophecy, he's more like a mistake that the pattern can't fix. And that makes him kind of terrifying. He doesn't just hate Rand, he obsesses over him, haunts him, hurts him in ways no one else does. Fain consumes Rand's nightmares, and it's for a good reason. Rand fears he will never be clean of the injuries Fain has left on him. The dagger, the taint of Shadar Logoth, the chaos he spreads, he's like a virus. He's not trying to rule, he just wants to destroy. Take, for example, in chapter 36 of A Crown of Swords, when Fain uses the Shadar Logoth dagger to stab Rand, and the wound behaves differently than anything we've seen. It's not like the taint from the One Power. The Aes Sedai Samitsu, who is one of the oldest and most knowledgeable healers of the Yellow Aja, doesn't even understand what is wrong with the wound. It's something worse, something unnatural. Even the best healers struggle to fix it. And that's the core of Fain. He's the glitch and the literal embodiment of chaos and corruption walking. Many of the people he touches, he corrupts, similar to how Mordath corrupted the nation of Hall, whether it be the White Cloaks in the Shadow Rising or Elida in the Fires of Heaven. When someone has a brush with Fain, he spreads rot and paranoia. He almost seems to infect them with a lust for power and a heavy mistrust for Rand al'Thor. There's even a theory that when Egwene spent all that time alone with Fain in the dungeon at Faldara in the Great Hunt, it starts to eat away at her relationship with Rand. It can't be understated just how much of a wild card Padan Fain is. And that brings us to part 6, Fain's endgame and legacy. So, what exactly happens to Padan Fain? When we start to look at the end of his story, there are a couple bigger moments that start to solidify just how much more dangerous and unhinged he is. And this part of his story starts off really cool and had readers so hyped up for what he was planning. The prologue for The Towers of Heaven offers one of the best examples. Fain is working his way through the blight like it's his own kingdom at this point. He is no longer weighed down by his madness, but he now feels free because of it and revels in it. He's taking down and slaying Jumara, these massive creatures that kind of look like Shai Hulud from the Dune universe. Then a band of Trollocs stumbles into his path, and at this point, Fain is actually controlling tendrils of Mashadar, the mist from Shadar Logoth, as well. This mist corrals them, and the Trollocs are all broken down by it into obedient servants of Padan Fain, and he continues building what is essentially a zombie Trolloc army as he is drunk off of his own madness. He decides he is so powerful, he will go after Randall Thor and after the Dark One itself. It's a lot. Then we get to his final moments, which are strange and kind of abrupt, and to some readers, very disappointing. So let's skip ahead all the way to chapter 47 of A Memory of Light. Here, Padan Fain moves in for the kill, and he's still controlling Mashadar, the Black Wind entity from Shadar Logoth. And he's basically a force of chaos, and he is so amped up that he thinks no one can stop him. And as he closes in on Rand, part of his mist stops sensing, like it's been cut off. Then he sees what looks like a corpse, one of the many that he's killed, except this one moves. The corpse grabs him by the throat, and it's Matt Cawthon. And Matt doesn't flinch. He stays pretty cool and steady, explaining that once you catch a disease and survive, you can't catch it again. And that's the big aha moment, because Fain is a sickness, something that infects and spreads corruption. But Matt's already faced all of that. He carried Mordeth's infected Shadar Logoth dagger, and it nearly killed him. But he lived, and now he's immune. Then Matt grabs the dagger and drives it straight into Fain's chest. His body dissolves. No explosive battle. No last words. Just a disease cured. The end. And I could see how some fans of the series might have been expecting or maybe hoping for something a little more bigger and badder and more action packed. But maybe that's the point to his end. Maybe he never belonged to the structure of the story. He wasn't part of the prophecy. He was just a glitch in the system, an error that doesn't belong in the pattern. He was twisted by two evils that should never mix, Mordeth and the Dark One, which made him something new, something the pattern didn't create and couldn't control. And only someone outside the rules like Matt could take him down. So even if he dies and goes out with a whimper, his origin story and relationship with Mordeth makes him one of the most feared characters in the story. He's actually so feared that there's a long-standing idea that Padan Fain actually had the potential to be the backup Dark One in the event the Dark One lost, that the pattern was grooming him to be a replacement if needed. Personally, I think this is a fun one, but I'm not sure how much it aligns with what Padan Fain means as a character, and it doesn't quite fit with Rand's decision at the end. The most likely scenario is that Robert Jordan died before really getting to explore Fain's ending, and Sanderson just had to come up with something. And I think that's why people feel disappointed with it. You see everything about the guy and just how powerful he is, and you expect big things for a character wielding such a new and different type of evil power. But Fain will always have one of the coolest backstories, even if his ending is a little meh. But I love the origins so much. That wraps things up for today, and if you enjoy these types of lore videos, make sure to like and subscribe. If you would like to help out the channel, check out my Patreon account and YouTube memberships. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back next time.